Welcome to Precinct 444, a podcast by the National Law Enforcement Museum located in Washington, D.C. Here at Precinct 444, we cover a wide range of topics surrounding American law enforcement through our 4 core shows and bonus content. Today and in future bonus episodes, we will feature an artist from our current exhibit, Officers as Artists, so they can talk about their law enforcement careers and art interests. Be sure to check back every other week as we publish more episodes featuring an artist. And remember, our core shows are released every other Wednesday, so don't miss those. Thanks for listening, stay safe, and come see us in Washington, D.C.
Welcome to Precinct 444. I am here with another installment of our Officers as Artists interviews. Today, I'm going to be talking to Natalie Murry, who is one of our featured artists in the exhibit. So Natalie, welcome.
Thanks, Anna.
Of course. And to get started, why don't you introduce yourself? Give us your name, tell us about the which agency you worked for, and what type of art that you make. Tell us the name of the piece that's in the exhibit.
Okay, I'm Natalie Murry. I worked with Kent Police Department in Washington State, and I was there for 10 years. The piece that I have in the exhibit, I call it Skully, and it is a digital work. So that means I was working on a digital drawing tablet. The work was, it isn't a tracing or anything like that. It's entirely done freehand, but it's with digital tools so that I use different types of brushes to get different kinds of paint effects. So some of the brushes I used were more of a thick paint effect, so it looks like it's got a little more dimension to it. And then other brushes had sort of a splattery paint effect, so the paint is kind of splattered off into different directions off to the sides here and there.
Mm-hmm. And the piece is a really, it's a very striking image when you go into the exhibit hall, because what I notice about it is it's framed. It's a print of your digital work, framed and hanging on the wall, but it almost especially when you get close to it, it looks like it's popping off the page, like it's almost 3D, which is something that's really interesting that you can do with that digital art. So that's just something that I've noticed about the piece, and I hope that other visitors, as they're looking at the exhibit and seeing Skully on their own, that they've kind of noticed that as well. So that's just kind of
that was an accident. I don't know how that happened, just how the framing and the matting came together.
Which is a really neat kind of effect, a happy accident, if you will.
Yeah, right.
So tell us a little bit about your law enforcement career. Included some art, included forensic artwork. So tell us a little bit about what inspired you to start creating.
Okay, well, I did art before I got into law enforcement, but I never drew people. While I was in working for Kent Police Department, my department started putting on training for forensic art for composites. And that's where an artist will sit down, or a police officer will sit down with a victim or a witness in a crime and draw a suspect. And since we sponsored this training, my sergeant said, "Hey, we have a couple free spots in the training class. Would you be interested in taking it? Because I know you like to draw." I said, "Yeah, I'd love to." So I took the class, and it was like 2 days after the class let out that we had a case. And my sergeant said, "Hey, we could use a drawing on this case. Would you want to do it?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll give it a try." And I did the drawing. And as soon as I came back to the station with it, one of the guys who had been my FTO looked at it and said, "I know who that guy is." And so I got an immediate hit on it, and it was fantastic. I said, "I like this. I really enjoy doing this, and it works." And that was kind of where my forensic art took off from there. Not long after that, I was assigned to the Puget Sound Violent Crimes Task Force, which is a cooperative venture with the FBI, where the FBI works with other agencies in the area to investigate bank robberies in the Seattle area. So I worked on the squad and worked in the whole Seattle area, but that opened up the world of Quantico to me. So I went back to Quantico a couple times with the squad doing training, one time with the squad, and then the other time I got to go back and do their 3-week forensic facial imaging course. And that showed me the other kinds of forensic art, which was postmortem drawing and age progressions. And then the kind that is nearest to my heart is 2-dimensional reconstructions, and also 3-dimensional from unidentified remains. That's working with skeletal remains. And that started me on kind of my fascination with skulls. And that's kind of where most of my fine art goes from there. I learned to look at skulls closely and to try and find what makes one skull different from another skull, because they're not all the same. So I look at skulls and try and see what makes one an individual, and to bring out that when I'm doing the reconstructions, to bring out why this one is different from that one, and how I can make it so that people can see that and try and get this person identified. Whereas before, it was just a case sitting on the shelf at the medical examiner's office and nobody knew who it was. And so that's what I do in my forensic artwork. And that kind of morphed into my fine artwork, that I'm fascinated with skulls and I want to draw them all the time now. And that's what I'm still doing in my fine artwork, as well as the forensic art.
Yeah, it's very cool. And I remember watching a documentary when I was a kid about, I think it was probably about ancient Egypt or something like that, and they were took a skull or a model of a skull and were creating a 3D reconstruction of what that person would have looked like in life. And I remember they would put which 2D is a little bit different, but they would put these little markers on to determine how thick the skin would be at those different at different points of the face. And it was something that I had never really thought of. And I remember being fascinated by that as a kid, just how do they know?
How do they know?
How do they know? And that's all part of the training that you do.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the training to become a forensic artist. What type of things did you talk about in those training programs to be able to create these facial reconstructions or even composite sketches, things of that nature?
Okay. Well, reconstructions are, like I said, my favorite. I ended up writing in 2023, it's published a book about advanced reconstruction techniques. But there was a gentleman, William Krogman, had studied for many years. He'd studied depth of, it was muscles and skin from the bone out to the surface of the skin on the face. He used 21 different locations on the face. And so he came up with these tables that we use in the US of tissue depth. And so that's when you use the tissue depth marker. So it's right down the center of the face and then along the sides of the face too. And so he divided it up into male and female. And then also he used slender and average and heavy sizes. So the forensic anthropologist will tell you what you have when you're looking at a skull, whether it's male or female, and then what the ancestry is. And you'll go to the tables that Dr. Krogman came up with. He was a forensic anthropologist. We have, since his original tables came out, we have other tables for different ancestries. And now they no longer he used cadavers when he did his original tables, but now they can do those same measurements on living persons using ultrasound. So you would think that those would be a little more accurate because muscles aren't slack like they would be using cadavers. But they're still very similar. And they've used populations from Louisiana. It's kind of interesting that in Louisiana, the faces are fuller in the lower part of the face. Don't know why that is. We have populations from Japan. There's populations from different parts of Africa, from China, all over the world. So there's a lot of different tables to use, but you use the tables for the tissue depth markers. You put the tissue depth markers on the face and you use them for 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional. But in 2-dimensional, you'll photograph the face. You'll photograph the skull at the medical examiner's office. I then bring it home and load it up in my computer and open it up in a drawing program and do that drawing at home. And then I email that to the detective and the medical examiner, and they can publish that in the media to try and get an identification on the person.
Looking at cold cases that use that facial reconstruction and things like that, and seeing the actual, when the person's identified or when they make an arrest or something like that, how similar they really do look. So it's
sometimes, yeah.
Sometimes they're not, but sometimes it's really it's kind of crazy how similar it can actually come out just by looking at the bone structure. And
yeah, well, for me, I find that you get a feeling on what the person looks like, and sometimes it doesn't have anything to do with it, and sometimes it does. There was a skull that I got a feeling that this person was uh, Norwegian or
Mhm.
had some kind of Swiss or Norwegian or whatever kind of look to them, and that's what I gave the guy, and it turned out that he was. And I don't know why I got that
Yeah.
feeling off of him, but it was. But the training, there isn't a lot of training. There's no college in the U.S. that teaches this. One of my colleagues who works for NCMEC, which you might be familiar with, but it's National Center for Missing and Exploited Children.
Mhm.
He teaches over on the East Coast at George Mason University, and I think he's also teaching elsewhere. But there is no accredited course for forensic art in the U.S. In the UK at Dundee, Scotland, there is a course on that includes forensic art, but it's also medical art,
Mhm.
medical illustration. But there is not really a college credited course in the US. So there are workshops that are taught by different forensic artists that are usually like week-long workshops. But it's very difficult to get into as a career for someone who is not already in law enforcement, because as you might imagine, police officers don't really trust someone who is
Mhm.
not in the law enforcement mellow already.
Mhm.
It's hard to trust an artist off the street to know law enforcement techniques and law enforcement interviewing. You can't interview somebody if you don't already have that background. You don't know what to do with the evidence. You don't know how things
Mhm.
are going to go in court. You can't trust someone to know those things and to handle your case properly, and not
Yeah.
screw up the whole case. So they really, most of the time, they want you to have that background. Not to say that there aren't agencies that have a forensic art unit in them that hires civilians, but they're already hired. They're not going to hire an
Mhm.
artist off the street. They have a
Yeah.
civilian unit that they then train to know those law enforcement techniques and procedures.
Mhm. The fact that there's no accredited course for it in the United States so far is kind of surprising. That's kind of mind-blowing. Your story is pretty similar to a number of other artists that are featured in the exhibit.
Yes.
They were law enforcement officers. They happened to be artists or liked
Yeah.
to draw, liked to do that in their free time. And
Mhm.
somebody in their department said, "Hey, we've got this course opening up," or "We need a composite sketch drawn. Do you think you could try it?" Like how it becomes kind of a career within a career for people, which is really it's kind of nice. It's kind of right place at the right time type of
Yeah,
this, which
yeah.
is really neat.
Well, there's a couple up in Idaho that travel around the country and put on training for composites for
Yeah.
police officers all around the country. And the number of people that they train is huge, mind-bogglingly large number that they go around the country and they train. But then out of that number of people that they train, I think it's a very small percentage that actually stay in the career, because you consider that police officers are very logical
Mhm.
thinkers, and then artists are very illogical people. So to
Yeah.
get that person
Very
in the
abstract.
same
Yeah.
brain is really difficult. So to get someone that has both sides of that in the same person, I think it's a very small percentage of those people that actually end up doing the career.
Definitely. And to get into our questions a little bit and let's talk about the medium of your piece. It's a digital piece, and there are some forensic artists that do digital. They do like pen and paper, like physical media as well. What led you to choose a digital medium as opposed to a physical one?
Yeah. Well, I had entered when I sent you that piece, I sent you some
Mhm.
others that were oil paintings too. So digital
Yeah.
was just one of the few that I sent. But I work digitally now on all my pieces because for forensic art, because it is just a better medium for forensic art.
Mhm.
Uh, it reproduces a lot better. When I did forensic art in pencil, you'd have to put it through a copy machine, and half my shading would be gone.
Mhm.
The copy machines back when I did it were not as good a quality. So digital to me is a lot better, and you can make the changes a lot quicker, that sort
Yeah.
of thing. But for fine art, it's just really fun. you
Yeah.
know?
It is fun. Like I'm an artist. I
Yeah.
do
Okay.
I'm a watercolor. I paint with watercolors, but I do a lot of my sketches on my iPad. So
Okay.
using the Apple Pencil and
Hmm.
Procreate or whatever. And it's like
Procreate. Yeah.
it's fun to just play with all the different brushes and
Yes,
ways
isn't
that
it?
it's just like it's opened up. Like when I was in high school, I drew pen and paper, like or pencil and paper, and I would get really frustrated because I'm not light-handed. Like I'm very heavy-handed. And I
Uh-huh.
would be just like, why did I erased and I can still see it. Like it was very frustrating. And being able to like do it all on the iPad and you can like play with it. And it's fun. It adds a different element of
Well,
fun
and
to
if you
to
make a mistake, you didn't totally screw up the piece
exactly.
forever.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially with watercolor. Watercolor is hard. I
Yeah,
commend you
it's
for
hard.
that. I can't do it. And
It's
so
hard.
if you don't,
Yeah,
if
I
you screw
started
up with the watercolor, then it's gone.
it's gone and it's
But
like,
for
well,
digital, it's not.
yeah, exactly. So it's one of those things where like and the fact that it's so kind of widely used and such a good tool for forensic art as well
Yeah.
is a really neat. And I think for this piece especially it's forensic themed, I guess. It goes along with the it's kind of an homage to the forensic work that you do. But in a way, it's using those same tools, those same techniques, but something that everybody can get something out of, which I think is
Yeah. Kind of bridges the two
bridges the gap.
sides. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. If you could say anything to encourage your colleagues or other law enforcement officers to take up something creative, what would you say?
For me, it's important to have a creative outlet because
Mhm.
the job is, and I think especially today, is so relentless in how it pounds you down, in how it just, there's so much negativity in that job these days. I can't imagine doing it now as compared to 20 years ago. It's so negative, and to be able to let some of that out, to have an outlet where you have joy, to have an outlet where you can create something beautiful as opposed to the ugliness that you see every day, I think is important. And if that happens to be art, that's great. If it's something else, that's great too. But for me, it's art. And to do something, I'm always surprised when I do something and it's beautiful. And I
Mhm.
think I did that. To have something that you can do that, to bring something beautiful in the world after seeing so much ugliness, gives me great satisfaction, gives me great joy. And if you can do that, you might surprise yourself.
Absolutely.
And you can keep it. You can, put it out there to the world. You can, pass it on to your family, put it on your wall, and give you joy every day.
Definitely. That was a great answer. Um, and then for my last question, you have a piece of artwork that's now hanging in a gallery at the National Law Enforcement
Isn't
Museum,
that
which is
crazy?
kind of an unlikely place for an art exhibit to be, but it's this has been a really interesting exhibit to kind of show this very human side of law enforcement officers and officers outside of just their role in uniform patrolling on the street. So what does it mean to you to have a piece of art on display in this exhibit at the National Law Enforcement Museum?
It is insane to me that it's there. It's insane to me that I have anything in any museum. And it is, I'm still, mind my mind is blown. It is crazy to me. And I'm very grateful that it's there. And I'm so glad that I got to go to the opening and see it there. And yeah, I thank you guys very much for putting it out there.
We're very appreciative that you've loaned your piece of artwork to us while this exhibit is open. It's one of Skully is helping tell the story of law enforcement officers as artists in and kind of in a way in a twofold way, telling the story of your career as a forensic artist, but also as yourself as an artist that happens to work in the field of law enforcement. So we appreciate you sharing your artwork with us, sharing your story with our listeners and our visitors today. And to anyone listening, you can see Skully and 49 other pieces of artwork by law enforcement officers here at the National Law Enforcement Museum in our DuPont Gallery. through August of 2025. So the exhibit will be up about halfway through this year. We encourage you all to come and see it and learn some more about our artists and law enforcement officers as artists. So Natalie, once again, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Anna.
Thanks for listening to this special bonus content featuring an artist from the museum's temporary exhibit, Officers as Artists, where the artworks of 50 law enforcement officers from all over the country are on display now through August 30th of this year. And remember, our core shows are released every other Wednesday, so don't miss those. Thanks for listening, stay safe, and come see us in Washington, D.C. Please subscribe to Precinct 444 on your favorite podcasting platform to stay connected and to receive our latest content as soon as it drops. We would love to hear from you. Send in your questions, comments, and feedback to precinct444@nleomf.org. You can help us make our content even better. The National Law Enforcement Museum is located at 444 East Street Northwest in Washington, D.C., and is dedicated to telling the story of American law enforcement. We expand and enrich the relationship between law enforcement and the community through educational journeys, immersive exhibitions, and insightful programs. Find us online at lawenforcementmuseum.org and stay tuned for more podcast content from Precinct 444. Until next time, stay safe. We'll see you at the Precinct.